Quarth. Otherwise known as that one game that was on that 110-in-1 multi-cart thing where you shot blocks at other blocks and then the blocks went down and blew your ship up. I've been wanting to get around to talking about this game for a good long while, and now that there's an open slot in what is laughingly called a schedule, or lack thereof, might as well get around to it and be done with it. Originally a 1989 arcade release from Konami, Quarth for the Nintendo Famicom is a combination shooter/puzzle game where the goal is to clear away the space debris made of blocks by shooting more blocks to form full shapes like squares and rectangles. And that's it, just squares and rectangles. You could choose from one of the two ships before you, a standard starfighter or this pot thing carried around by two little angels. I'm missing something from this equation, aren't I? Anyways. The basic premise of Quarth is somewhat straightforward. After picking a starting round and your spaceship of choice, purely out of which one looks nicest to you, there's no real difference performance-wise, you start the game proper. You move your ship around, there are various shapes or space debris, whatever you want to call it, falling from the sky. You fill in the shapes with your own blocks and they disappear. If you fill in multiple shapes to form one box thing, you can score combos that are worth more points. However, if one piece of space debris touches this dotted line, your ship explodes and you lose a life. Lose all your lives and it's game over. Now you can earn extra lives for every 10,000 points scored, so there's always that risk versus reward element at play here to try and attain a high score in order to gain more chances, but sometimes survival is more important, and you need to clear away every single piece in order to survive. Now while Quarth might have largely puzzle elements, at the end of the day it's still a shooter, and as such there are bonuses you could acquire by filling certain colored shapes. These bonuses will either clear the screen of debris, pause the scrolling for a short period of time, or provide a points multiplier. They also come at random points during gameplay and never at the same time. In fact, one thing about Quarth is that the courses themselves are randomized affairs, so there's no chance of memorizing patterns for one session since it'll be different the next time around. Oh, there are some layouts that are constant here and there, but for the most part, it's a slightly different game every time you play. Controlling your Quarth spacecraft thing is fairly straightforward. You move your ship by pressing left or right on the D-pad, while pressing up scrolls the screen upwards slightly faster. Both buttons, A and B, are fire buttons. It works, it's functional, and it suits your needs just fine, which is good because Quarth is a game that requires a bit of fast reflexes to conquer, especially in later rounds where the speed ramps up quite a bit. Now in addition to the single player mode, there's also 3 different 2-player modes. One alternates between turns, another is a competitive mode, and finally there's a co-op mode where you and a friend try to make it as far as you can. So you got a couple 2-player games that's worth trying out, almost akin to Tengen Tetris with its very 2-player modes. Quarth never got a localized release on the NES. There was the Game Boy version, which is slightly different, and there was also the arcade original that was localized under a different name. I got to play this version back in the day through one of those 110-in-1 multi-card things because it was a fairly common game that would show up on those packs. And it ended up being one of those games that I played the most because it was such a perfect marriage of the block-based puzzle game and the scrolling shooter, 2 genres that I enjoyed immensely. And perhaps that's why Quarth worked for me, because it's as functional and as enjoyable as a shooter, but instead of explosions, you have blocks fading into nothingness. Now, this is somewhat of an acquired taste, as one's disdain for one genre or the other might prevent some folks from fully enjoying what Quarth has to offer. I know some folks who enjoy shooters but couldn't get into Quarth because of the puzzle elements, so it's not a completely hypothetical situation. And indeed, the concept does take a bit to wrap your head around at first, but once you get into the spirit of things and once you figure out the mechanics, you slowly but surely develop a mindset for this game, and eventually it boils down to quick reflexes and quick thinking in order to survive the perils of space block debris. And you have a fun time doing it, while it lasts at least. Quarth is a fairly simple looking game, tiles on the side with some minor details, plain looking block pieces, and simplistically animated playable units alongside a solid color background. The colors change depending on the level, the scrolling is nice and smooth, there's none of that sprite flickering business because it's never that busy. On a whole, it's a rather straightforward looking game with some nice bits of detail like the angel things carrying the pod, but those looking for 8-bit resplendency will probably not find it here. Still, it's a nice looking game for what it is, and it runs smoothly, so that's worth something, I guess. Sound-wise, Quarth is also fairly basic fare, although really, basic fare on a Famicom NES title by Konami is still pretty good stuff by normal standards. Sound effects are top-notch. Not much to say there. Not counting the brief jingles or the menu music, the soundtrack comprises only a couple tunes that play during the main portions of the game, the early segments playing this rather catchy, upbeat melody, before giving way to this slightly more intense tune that would fit in nicely with one of Konami's shooter games on the NES. And just as you're near the end, that melody speeds up to really ramp up the tension, and then you clear the level and you're back to the first song, and you repeat this for the 10 levels or so. So, not a large pool of music, and depending on the kind of person you are, listening to the same couple songs over and over again might seem tiresome after a while, but that's just the way things were back in the day. And hey, at least the tunes are pretty catchy stuff, so, you could go either way. Overall, Quarth on the Famicom is good old Quarthy fun. That sounded lame, but like I said, it's a perfect blend of scrolling shooter and puzzle elements that just works and it makes sense once you wrap your head around it. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you enjoy this sort of game, I guess you could try tracking down the Famicom version because it's a pretty solid game. Or try your luck looking for the game on those NES multi-cart hunting things and hope it's on one of those. But then again, if you want an easier way to enjoy this game locally, just get the Game Boy version. It's almost the same thing, but that's for next time.